Hey fam, we're back with another banger. What if Naruto had massive harem with Glynda, Salem and Calavera? So before we start, if you are craving adult mature content, join my Patreon now, link are in the description box. Alright, enough talk, let's fire it up. Naruto took particular pride in his prize today, not just the buck he'd brought down, but the sheer size of the beast, its weight. Antlers, everything about his quarry made for a worthy foe and a hearty meal. It had taken him days to hunt the damn thing, leading him on a merry chase through wintry wilderness before he finally cornered it and brought it down. Not with any fancy jutsu on his part, nor explosive attacks, though he could have used either just him, his prey, and a single arrow knocked to the string of his bow. One shot, one kill, one victory. It felt good. Now the deer decorated his shoulders, slung over his back like the trophy it was. But it was a good weight. The weight of progress, triumph, hard work and progress made with nothing more than the strength of his hands and his alone. Even if those hands were little older these days. Nevertheless, he kept moving. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he plodded onward, continuing the long trek home. Steam fogged the air before him as he exhaled, keen eyes fixed firmly upon the horizon and a distant plume of pale smoke therein. He would eat well tonight. Kurama would have been proud. Even this late in winter, it heartened him to know that there was still game to be had without rousing a bear from its den. He had food aplenty already. More than enough to last the months ahead, but it was always good to keep one's skills sharp, and this had proven to be a long winter indeed. Longer than he would have liked, really. Folks down in the village were starting to call it unnatural, the wrath of heavens, a curse from the gods, a sign of their displeasure. Unlikely. A low, resonant voice rang out amidst his thoughts. Gods wouldn't stoop to such petty acts. Quote, "You think so?" he muttered under his breath, expelling another plume of steam. Could be. Ever since he'd first found himself in this world, he had heard it. The voice. Always there, ever present. He didn't know who or what it was, only that it seemed to be an ally, one that wished to help him. It was no Kurama, but it helped to fill the void he'd left behind. Or maybe it was just a sign of his own budding insanity. Who could say? Honestly, apparently the voice in his head was feeling chatty today, because it kept rambling on. People these days are hung up on the most curious aspects of life. Why would gods make their displeasure know through the weather? Naruto grunted and rolled his shoulder to adjust his burden. Can't tell you. We didn't really have gods like you in my world. The only one I knew killed me, then my world. I am sorry for that. He shrugged. Like I said before, 's fine. I'm over it. Quote. Taking pity on the voice, Naruto decided to throw it a bone. Look, he said at length as he skirted a fallen tree weighed down by snow, humans are often weak because of what they refuse to be. Vulnerable, honest, humble and accountable. We fear what we don't understand, and some people prefer to let their fear become blame, and they lay that blame at the feet of what they call the divine. I have begun to understand that. He walked in silence for nearly a minute before a thought occurred to him. So, awesome, and you're real and not a figment of my imagination. Naruto wiped a bead of cold sweat from his brow and turned his gaze toward the overcast sky. Don't suppose you could magic me up some sunshine? Quote. I cannot. Worth a try. Naruto didn't mind the oncoming storm, didn't much care, either. Food was food. A hunt was a hunt. A hunter must hunt. He kept walking, focusing on the smoke of the chimney to the north, kept moving, and gradually the steady crunch of snow beneath his boots drowned out all unnecessary thoughts. He let himself fall into a comfortable routine, idly circulating chakra throughout his aching muscles to keep them fresh. This was a modest life he'd managed to make for himself, maybe even a meager one. But it was his, and that mattered. It was free. It was peaceful. It was quiet. This was the life he'd been promised, and despite the occasionally chatty voice in his ear, it wasn't a bad one. On your left. Naruto paused with an impatient sigh. He'd already sensed the intruder long before the voice spoke. No, that wasn't right. In many ways he was the intruder here. A NY man trying to make a living for himself way out here in the outskirts could be considered such when it came to Mother Nature. Sure enough, something stirred in the undergrowth behind him a heartbeat later, causing him to pause and look back. The snout of a bristling beast emerged from a snow-laden bush, revealing a mangy-looking gray wolf. Not a grim, he realized after a moment's pause, just a harmless beast, well, harmless to him at any rate. As he looked on in quiet consternation, it planted its paws and kept its head low to growl at him, hackles raised, bright eyes fixed upon his catch. Naruto felt the ghost of a smile touch the corner of his mouth. Hello, there. You're out late. And here I thought you'd be. Hibernating. Most predators back down once they realized you weren't afraid of them, but this one didn't. Concerning. Don't suppose you've got a pack with you. I could use a new rug or two. No, he didn't sense anything nearby, it was alone, then. Which made its determination all the more confusing. Rolling his shoulders, he idly adjusted the carcass there and pivoted to lay one hand upon the hunting knife at his belt. Can't let you have this, ma afraid. I brought this buck down fair and square. Hunters gotta hunt, ya know. The wolf redoubled its growl and inched towards him. He realized belatedly, as his eyes strayed to her distended stomach. That explained things. Looked like she'd have pups any day now. She must be desperate to hunt in these conditions, though he could understand her need. No food, no milk. No milk, and her babies would die. Still, he was loath to give up something he'd worked so hard to hunt. The wolf growled anew, ready to rush him and die for it if need be. It would be such a waste. Naruto snarled back, eyes pulsing white for a moment. Don't try it. The wolf backed down with a whimper. Pity kicked at his chest. Damn his blasted bleeding heart. Reaching over his shoulder, he seized one of the deer's mighty hind legs and tore it off at the haunch with his bare hands. Holding the still bleeding meat up for good measure, he watched the wolf's gaze track the meaty morsel. A whine escaped the beast, but it made no move to attack. Tossed it down at his feet. After a moment's consideration, he tore another leg loose and held that up as well. Crouching down, he hefted one of the juicy haunches toward the poor critter. Come here. The wolf didn't budge, doubtlessly fearing a trap on his part. Not that he could blame her, just as a hunter must hunt, so too must the prey ever be wary of the hunter. Everything he was doing now flew in the face of her instincts and tradition. Small wonder she was afraid of him. That said, his patience and his generosity had their limits. His eyes glowed anew. I said, come here. The wolf inched forward, eyes fixated on the prize to the exclusion of all else. It had either given up, or was willing to risk capture to claim even a morsel of meat. He had but to wait, so he did. He remained still as stone, holding the deer's limb outward as the mother to be patted forward. He saw the moment desperation gave way to ravening hunger, the wolf pounced with a snarl, her jaws seizing upon the leg with feral ferocity. The meat was torn from his grasp in an instant, flung to the floor and hastily devoured. Naruto allowed it with a weary smile, idly reaching down to run a soothing hand across the creature's bony back while she was distracted. He could feel her spine through her mangy fur and sense a whole host of other problems besides. That wouldn't do. His right palm glowed gold. Imparting a touch of his own vitality in its wake, the wolf jolted in surprise, but didn't stop eating. It didn't dare for fear of losing what it doubtlessly believed would be its last meal. That gave him the opportunity to complete his work. He mended her malnutrition, boosted her immune system, fixed a limp in her hind leg, then made sure her unborn pups would be healthy. She was carrying a whole litter. Good for her. This old forest could use some life. Belatedly, he realized the wolf was looking up at him, having finished her food, placid as a bunny rabbit. He scratched her once behind the ears. Unable to help himself. There's a good girl. So speaking, offered the remaining haunch of meat to her. You need to save this one, all right. Make it last. For your pups. She took it between her teeth. But didn't devour it as she had the last. Her tail swayed once in what he hoped was understanding. He very much doubted she understood his words, but hopefully she recognized the sentiment. I've done all I can for you. He made a shooing gesture with his offhand. Back to your den, now. Get. He needn't tell her twice. Prize in jaw, the beast bolted away into the underbrush. Kind of you. Was it? He doubted he'd ever see her again. It was a whim, nothing more. Rather than retort, Naruto grunted as he climbed back to his feet, idly turning his gaze toward the horizon. It had begun to snow. Echoing that very thought, a bitter breeze picked up, lashing at him through his heavy winter coat. He shivered a bit despite himself, gloves rubbing together in a vain attempt to preserve warmth. Winds howling. From there it was a relatively short trek back to his cabin. He knew he'd found the hidden path when he came to a pair of overgrown trees rimmed by thick thorn bushes. He forced his way through, uncaring as the briars tugged at both his catch and his jacket but failed to find purchase on his aura. In short order, he was through. Trudging up the short steps to his home, he paused to squint up at the falling flecks of ice, frowning a little at the overcast skies and the mountains beyond. What had begun as flurries this morning had already resolved. A steady snowfall by the time he'd returned. A storm was moving in. Might have to clear off the roof again before nightfall. Wouldn't do to have it collapse on him again. He still remembered the same time he'd awoken to find his portion of the house and himself crushed by wooden logs. That had been a particularly embarrassing moment on his part. He wasn't seriously hurt, but was still left with a lump on his head and feeling like a fool for his faults. She had laughed at him when she found him the next morning, giggled really while she pointed at his plight. I told you that roof wasn't stable. Gods, you really are hopeless when it comes to building a house, aren't you? It's too funny. Guess I'll have to help out. Count yourself lucky, Whiskers. The greatest huntress in all of Remnant will lend you a hand. He still heard her laughter sometimes in the silence when he stopped to listen. Saw her when he closed his eyes. Even now she was realer than the day she'd left. Would you look at that? Snug as a bug in a rug. Told you we could do it, and to think, it only took us 9 months. Best 9 months of his life by far, bar none. He remembered them fondly to this day. My work here is done. Be seein' ya, Tilda. Don't be a stranger, now. Hopefully she was doing well these days. Oh, I almost forgot. My name is. A rueful smile tugged at his lips as he swung the door open, tilted his shoulders to slip under the arch with his meal in hand, and ducked inside. Nowadays his humble home was a cozy little cabin, all things considered. He'd built it from scratch, rebuilt it, then torn it down and built it back up yet again when he wasn't satisfied with the result. Each time he gradually added more to it, made improvements as time went by. A carefully prepared fire burned in the hearth within, warming his bones while its smoke funneled up the chimney. I'm home. He sighed into the silence. No one greeted him in return. Naturally. Stomping his feet on a fur mat at the door, he carefully cleared them of excess snow. He turned to set his catch down on a bloody table near the door. He'd skin that later, but for now he wanted to freshen up. Shucking off his coat onto a crude wooden hook to dry, he approached the fire. A smaller table awaited him there, bearing a wooden basin of water. Removing his thick gloves, he dipped his hands within, and began to wash his face. Splashing warm water on his whiskered visage and the blood off it, he soon felt himself refreshed again. He took a moment to stare at himself in the water, and the reflection therein. Silver eyes stared back at him within the basin. He sighed. Dang, still there. Not sure why I'm surprised anymore. Even now, despite his best efforts, he stopped short at the sight of them. He wasn't at all used to his new eyes, they startled him sometimes. Even years after his rebirth. He had blue eyes in his last life, not these shining windows into his soul. Still, he was grateful for them. Better to have strange eyes. He didn't understand the no eyes at all. Living blind was a terrible thing. He'd experienced that horror once in his last life and had no desire to ever relive it again. Shaking his head, he began to dry his face with a rough towel. No rest for the weary just yet. He had to take his catch out back and skin it, prepare it, then cook it. Raw meat didn't agree with him, so he had best make sure he didn't louse it up this time. Something stirred behind him in shadows of the door. The voice in his head had gone quiet. He wondered why. There was no time to consider it. Naruto paused, sniffed once, frowned. Now as a familiar scene reached his nose. I know the smell of a rotting corpse. He Tilda. Guilty as charged. A merry laugh answered from the dark. Here, catch Tilda. He almost tensed, nearly expecting a knife in the back. But it never came. A dull thump behind him heralded the arrival of. Ah, so that was how they wanted to play. Gazing down, he found a broken body lying at his feet, a young woman by the look of her. Hair dark and skin tan, body wrapped in a green winter cloak. Probably from the little hamlet down south. No one he recognized. But that wasn't what gave him pause. Someone had gouged her eyes out with a knife. He recognized the signs. It looked like she'd died screaming. Poor thing. At length, he looked up. Is there a particular reason you brought a dear girl into my home? Pearly white teeth flashed in the gloom as his guest refused to reveal themselves. Since you're so fond of collecting corpses, I thought I'd bring my own. Intimidation. Fear. Anger. His would-be assailant was trying to provoke him, unsettle him, drive him to attack. Clever, but pointless. He'd grown from that naive reckless boy into a young man far calmer than before, one not so easily prone to overreaction. I don't collect corpses, he said at length. I hunt. His guest clapped like a gleeful child. Ah, but I do as well. You do nothing well, came the correction. I hunt animals for food. You hunt people for sport. We are not the same. Aren't we? His assailant stepped out the shadows with a merry titter, revealing himself at long last. The way I see it, we're both in the same line of, well, let's call it work. In short order he found himself face to face with a cloaked fellow in his 30s. The stranger gazed at him with gold eyes, his long dark roan hair worn in a ponytail braided to resemble a scorpion's tail, mouth set in a manic grin. But I don't need this anymore. Casting aside his hood with a flourish, he revealed himself in all his grisly glory. His chest was crisscrossed with prominent scars and he wore a two-tone dark brown, short-sleeved duster jacket worn open at the front. Beneath that he wore a white sleeveless jacket, left open to expose his bare chest. And white pants. Over his jacket were two buckled, dark gray leather suspenders supporting a black cummerbund, with a third strap running across his chest perpendicular to the suspenders and joining with them on his back. There was also a dark brown leather belt slanted across his hips. His arms were covered with cream-colored bandages and elbow-length, brown fingerless gloves with a middle finger loop. Over these were dark brown leather, laced-up vambraces capped with small, silver counters. He also wore knee-high, dark brown leather boots with strips of black up the shins and buckled straps around the ankles, and silver polanes strapped to his knees. On each earlobe hung a silver, ring-shaped earring, with a third near the top of his left ear. But perhaps most notable of all was the scorpion stinger protruded from his back, creaking now as he unfurled it. Was that supposed to impress him? He'd seen Faunus before. He had no idea who this guy was. In the end, it didn't change anything. The ghost of a smile touched whiskered cheeks as he gazed upon him. You're not from round these parts, are you? The madman tittered merrily into one hand, gaze aglow in the gloom. Guilty as charged. How'd you guess? His own gleamed. Because both the locals and the Grim know to stay far away from this place. It wasn't a threat, but truth. Grim turned to stone when he glared at them. For reasons he still didn't understand. As for the locals, the last band of pugnacious punks who thought they could make an easy buck by robbing a hunter blind paid for it with their own eyes. He'd staked out their 7 skulls by the door as a warning. Most heeded it. Some didn't, like this psycho for instance. Ooh, I'm shivering. The deranged Faunus rubbed his hands together with a maniacal laugh. You're nothing like the others, are you? You're prepared. You knew I was coming. He stamped his feet, unable to contain his glee. You were ready. As I live and breathe. A true warrior has entered the fray. Yeah, he'd known someone was stalking him for the better part of a week now, yes, but he wasn't about to admit that. Instead he set down his tools and pivoted to face the Faunus fully. Look, buddy, you really don't want to do this. More laughter followed. Buddy, you have no idea who I am, do you? His ignorance didn't anger the Faunus, far from it. He only seemed emboldened by his lack of knowledge. How thrilling. He threw his head back and barked a laugh at the ceiling. Everyone knows my name these days, but not you. Oh no, you look at me and you see no one. Just another corpse left in your wake. I haven't felt like this in ages. Reet, Mr. Tall, lanky and creepy was clearly off his rocker. Look, you've clearly mistaken me for someone else. So why don't you just turn around and leave? Why, friend, my name is Tyrion, the madman sketched shallow. Bow, one hand over his chest. And I'm afraid that is not possible. My assignment from Her Grace was to kill you. So that is what I must do. He giggled anew into said hand. One does not upset the queen. Queen, the hell was he on about? But the lunatic wasn't finished with him, he was still ranting on. Much to his annoyance. I must say, it's been such a long time since I killed a true silver-eyed warrior. rising from his bow, the scorpion faunus fixed him with a sly smile. The last one hardly put up a fight, his lips split in a sly sneer, sardonic and cruel. She was weak. We took her eyes and left her to rot in the wastes. Naruto went still. Last one. She. Surely he wasn't talking about her. Couldn't be. But not you. The madman tittered anew, eyes gleaming with glee. You were terribly hard to find. Hazel couldn't track you down. I've spent weeks ming my way through the mountains, and even then I happened upon your humble hovel of a hut by chance. The poor fools down in that village sold you out, did you know that? They called you their silver god and sang your praises. But as soon as I started cutting, they practically fell over themselves to sell you out. Sad, isn't it? This mustn't register on an emotional level. Stay calm. Deep breaths. Naruto exhaled heavily through his nose. This ain't a hut, ya know. It's a cabin. Is it, though? Tyrion snorted, rolling his eyes. Is it really? Seems to me you've been on your own for quite a while now. Have the children flown the coop? Naruto saw no need to answer. He lived in the middle of nowhere for a reason, it was peaceful. Safe. A sudden bang from the attic above caused his head to snap up. Damn his luck. A little girl poked her head down from the hatch in the ceiling, silver eyes blinking. Daddy, what's going on? Who's that? He hissed at her, already knowing it was too late. Get back inside. She yelped and did as he bid, but the damage was done. Tyrion's smile practically split his face. What's this I see? A daughter. No wonder you're hiding. He practically hopped up and down, rubbing his hands in manic glee. Happy day. My queen will be most pleased. 4 eyes for the price of 1. Have you ever had a moment where someone pushes you too far? He thought he'd lost that part of himself long ago. How wrong he was. He knew he shouldn't let this register on an emotional level, that this was a mistake, that he was doing exactly what Tyrion wanted, that he was rising to the bastard's bait. But he couldn't help himself. He'd always been emotional, even in his first life, prone to shouting fits and the like. This was different. A cold heat could be cold, simmer deep inside of him, turning his vision to a tunnel. And there, at the end of it, him. Tyrion tittered, blind to the danger. Struck a nerve, have I? He'd no idea. For an instant, just a moment, he lost control. His killing intent spiked and the beast within came howling to the surface. Don't touch my daughter. Tyrion must have finally sensed some smidgen of annoyance on his part, Bako. Say his savage smile finally faded somewhat in the face of his quiet rage. That's a fine look on your face, my friend. I think we've had enough talk now, don't you Tilda? More than enough. Naruto settled into a stance of his own, voice warping further, stomping one foot down to as he brought his right fist forward. I'm gonna stuff you back into whatever coffin you crawled out of. He Tilda. Tyrion's gaze changed color, shifting from gold to purple as he unfurled the wrist knives mounted on his arms. You have no idea how many coffins I've crawled out of. Naruto pivoted, firelight framing his back, lighting his silver eyes. Less than me. That's it. That's the look I wanted to see. Tyrion bounded from one foot to another and clapped his hands, veritably giggling with glee. I'm aquiver with fear. He lunged. Naruto met him halfway with a devastating haymaker. Crunch went the faunus, faces his cheek dented inward, a lone tooth whistling through the air as his charge was brought to a violent halt. Momentum caught up to him an instant later and launched him backward, violently ejecting the loud lunatic back outside into the cold from which he'd come. He supposed it was too much to hope that would finish him off. The snow cushioned his fall as he landed on his back. By the time he reached the threshold, he was already getting back up. Naruto stalked down the steps after him with a sigh. Tyrion flew at him again and wound up right where he'd started, on his back in the snow. Naruto lengthened his stride, arms swaying at his sides, fingers hooking into vivid golden claws. Quote, I consider myself a good judge of humankind these days. A faint golden light began to suffuse his shoulders and face as he stomped towards him, lending his eyes an eerie glow as he spoke. Having formerly been one myself, I can definitely say there's something missing in your eyes, Tyrion Kalos. The madman leered at him, tail arching over his back. And what is THAAAAACK? His words peeked in. To a strangled gurgle as an uppercut barreled into his chin from below, simultaneously slamming his jaw shut on his tongue with an audible click. Shrieking in unholy pain by the blood on his lips heat. Bitten deep, the flailing Faunus pivoted and slammed a savage kick into his chest. Slow. Naruto accepted it, caught the ankle under one arm, then used it as leverage to drag his Faunus foe in and elbow his face. Sloppy. Releasing his leg, he followed up with another 1-2-3 jab to his adversary's nose. From there, he bloodied Tyrion's twisted visage further still, deflected a follow-up slashes from his blades. Diverted the next off his wrist, before flowing back onto the attack once more. Sad. A kidney punch devastated Tyrion's defenses, accompanied by a bruising backhand to the face. Followed by an utterly demeaning blow to the solar plexus. All this and more laid Kalos low in an instant. The once arrogant assassin stumbled back and fell to his hands and knees in the snow. He wasn't there for long. Naruto reached down, seized him by the scuff of his neck, dragged him upright and dangled him off the ground. Silver eyes met his. That something is fear. Tyrion gurgled wetly. I fear nothing. That right there. He redoubled his grip, rendering Tyrion's response a gurgled gasp. That's your problem. Fear is one of our greatest strengths. Without fear, you'll never grow stronger. Neither is a person nor is a fighter. I'm sure no one's ever told you this before, so allow me to be the one to enlighten you. Without fear. He leaned forward to leer at him. This is not gonna end well for you. With a wordless smile, he tossed Tyrion into a tree. Summer Rose Uzumaki watched her father fight from the attic. Well, win, really, because Daddy never lost. Not ever. That wasn't arrogance on her part. Just the truth. Dad was good. He was very good. Best there ever was. He'd been teaching her ever since she could walk, enough for her to watch and understand. And right now, she knew this Tyrion guy weird name didn't stand a chance. He was still scary, though. Almost like what was the word? A blender. That was the one. Tyrion Kalos was a bloody blender of violence, wrist blades slashing. Guns blazing, tail stabbing, striking at impossibly erratic angles and moving in a way no sane man possibly should be able to without breaking their spine. Yet for all that, he couldn't touch Daddy. Summer knew this with all the surety of a child. She watched Naruto weave backwards, hands clasped behind his back, until they weren't. Crunch. A vicious backhand cracked across Klo's face and sent him sprawling into the snow. Ouch. Looked like he'd lost another tooth. The big meanie was losing a lot of those today. At this rate he wouldn't have any left, she giggled. Ed a little at the idea of him not having any teeth, tried to distract herself from the life and death battle unfolding before her. Because you see, the laughing lunatic wouldn't stay down. No matter how many times Daddy hit him. He just kept getting back up again. She knew he felt pain. He cried out whenever Daddy hit him, but he'd only stay down for seconds at best before dragging himself upright again. The harder he hit him, the faster he moved. Something was wrong. Summer didn't know what exactly, not for certain, but she knew something was terribly, horribly wrong here. Dad loomed over Tyrion, hands planted in his pockets. Face stern, breath calm. He wasn't even winded. Had enough. Tyrion cackled. Hardly. Shredding and slicing and shrieking like the lunatic he was, the flailing Faunus went on the offensive again. Relentlessly driving Naruto Daddy back toward the treeline. Weaving left, right, then out of sight, he slashed out with one blade, vaulted into a handstand, kicked out at Naruto's chest. Stabbed at his feet with his stinger, always attacking, forcing her Daddy to dodge backwards, to no avail. Away from the house, away from her, towards the shadows. Into darkness. Was she imagining things or did she see red eyes there? Something shifted in the shadows, something big. Several somethings. She wasn't seeing things. Those were grim. Lots of them. It's a trap. Summer scrambled down from the loft and paused at the door, heart in her throat, yet she didn't dare venture outside or call out for fear of distracting him. One wrong move and he might get hurt or worse. And Ursa lunged out of the trees at him. Naruto reacted instantly, planting a foot into the snow. He ducked under Tyrion's whirling blades, backhanded him away with an open palm. Then pivoted to catch the beast's paw with his free hand. His brow furrowed as he glared daggers at the beast. There were no words on his part, no clever quips, just a look of pure and utter scorn. His eyes went white and light burst from them, blasting outward in a singular wave of cleansing purity. Summer cooed softly at the sight. Ooh, pretty lights. Evidently the Grim disagreed, because it screamed as the light passed over it. Kalos averted his eye and shielded his face with a pained hiss, but not Summer. She stared headlong into the light without fear. She never got tired of seeing that. Watching that blazing radiance burst forth from her father's eyes always caused something to sing in her soul. He insisted it wasn't a semblance, said it was a power they both shared, one she would one day learn to harness. Just as he had. Whatever it was powerful. Because when the light cleared she found herself treated to an amazing sight as always, the Ursa had been turned to stone. As had every other Grimm behind it, 6 in all, each frozen just shy of leaping at her father. As she looked on, their now rigid bodies collapsed and crumbled into dust, leaving only black ashes behind. So cool. She couldn't wait to learn that. Remarkable. Tyrion dragged himself upright and spat blood into the snow, grinning through crimson teeth. You're not even winded. You really aren't like the others, are you? Naruto caught him by the face with his right hand, muffling his words. You talk too much. The crazy Faunus giggled madly despite the palm in his face, seized Dad's wrist with both hands, and locked his legs around her father's arm. Latching on like a limpet, he held fast, holding him in place. In the same instant his tail stabbed forward into his chest. It was too close. If he got stung by that. Thunk. Tyrion's tail struck harmless wood, leaving him clutching a large wooden log. Even from here, Summer saw the bark warp as the poison seeped into it and gulped. Definitely poison. If Dad got hit by that, he'd be dead. With a demented laugh Tyrion cast it aside, his head whipped her way, wearing a manic grin. It seems your papa's run off, little girl. But don't worry, as she looked on. That grin grew darker still. I'll take good care of you. Summer lifted her chin, set her jaw, and stared the monster masquerading as a man in the eye. My daddy won't run away. Tyrion tittered, stinger curling over his left shoulder. Is that so? And what makes you say that, child? Summer raised a finger and pointed. Because he's right behind you, dummy. The ground trembled. It was Tyrion's only warning before there erupted beneath the frenetic Faunus in a sudden explosion, showering them both in snow. Tyrion pivoted to face the attack, brandishing his blades in a brutal crosscut and cut down. Predictable. Naruto's face vanished, as did the rest of his body. In a plume of smoke. He slashed through and shadow clone. Tyrion tutted, wholly unamused. Well, that's not fair at all. Papa reappeared behind Tyrion just as she'd said he would, grabbed him by the braid and yanked, both hauling him backward and nearly breaking his neck in the same instant. Summer had time enough to hear him hiss furiously at the Faunus. You're not living up to the legend, Scorpion. An angry blue sphere sparked to life in his grasp. He slammed it headlong into Tyrion's back, right in the spine. Summer never got tired of seeing the Rasengan in action. Blue was her absolute favorite color after all. It was one of the very first things she remembered, that Glorio. A sprawling sky stretching out as far as the eye could see. Dad's technique was always so big and shiny, nothing like the small one she could make, and thrice as powerful. Tyrion definitely felt it, the impact of her father's technique. The spiraling sphere showed him no mercy. The instant it struck his back rocketed forward, smashed through one tree, then two, now three before gravity finally two. Over and sent him skidding into the snow, tearing up great skid marks in the earth as he went. He struck a rock and went still. Naruto didn't give him the chance to recover, down he came from on high, smashing into him with a devastating axe kick. Tyrion barely got his arms up in time, blocking with both wrist blades crossed before him in the shape of an X. His weapons shattered. Broken steel flew through the air as Naruto's boot smashed through them, then his arms, followed by his chest. Aura crackled in a dull flare of purple, then he was gone, rocketing deeper into the woods. Dad stalked after his prey and Summer, unable to help herself, scrambled after him in return. She found Tyrion crouched on the ground, snarling up at her father like a wild animal. What are you? Daddy? Naruto hummed once and decked him yet again, sending the Faunus stumbling into the snow. Pain is your reward for being near me. Quote. Tyrion gagged as a fist folded him up. Fate won't be your friend when I'm around. A knee smashed into Chloe's face, shattering more teeth, leaving him reeling. You can blame me for all the tragedy that follows, and your agony that abounds. Was Dad singing? It sounded like he was. One of his old lullabies that he used to hum when she was smaller. But rather than the traditional upbeat tunes she'd come to know and love, TTI's one sounded melancholy, almost sad. Almost as though he were saying goodbye. Not to someone and definitely not to Tyrion but to this quiet, peaceful life the two of them had enjoyed for so long. Swaying drunkenly on his feet, Tyrion threw one last wild punch. Naruto caught his arm and wrenched it down. The moment he did, the Faunus struck, his stinger stabbed out again. Dad made no effort to catch it, nor did he dodge. He let it come, waiting patiently as Tyrion's tail extended to its full length and his eyes flashed. Summer knew what would happen next. Sure enough, her father's gaze burned bright and the prehensile limb froze mid-lunge, rendered solid stone. There it was. Dad's semblance. He could turn people or parts of them if he so chose to solid stone. It only really worked when someone didn't have aura, or just plain had theirs depleted, like Tyrion did now. Paired kinda nicely with the whole silver eyes thing, ya know. Like it was meant to be. Downright divine. With one glance, he could kill Grimm, and in another render someone a statue. Or in this case, cripple an opponent. Tyrion recoiled, aghast, weighed down by the sudden transformation of flesh to stone but not for long. Naruto swept a hand through the stinger, shattering it down the middle. The wailing shriek of pain that followed made Summer flinch, but Kalo's reaction didn't end there. He didn't let the pain didn't break him, on the contrary, it drove him berserk. He rounded on Papa with wild, bloodshot eyes, fingers clenched into claws. If he'd been fast before he was blinding now, wild and savage, little more than a beast. Didn't save him. Dad took a punch to the face. Turned his cheek, reached up and caught Tyrion's wrist. His eyes gleamed. You really have no fear, do you? Such a pity. Let's fix that. Even as he spoke, Summer watched Tyrion's fingers rapidly calcify. Skin hardening into unfeeling rock. The weight made the Faunus slump for a moment, but only just. Screaming imprecations he lunged forward with his remaining arm and tried to claw Naruto's eyes out. Dad caught that hand by the fingers and his semblance flared anew. In an instant, flesh and bone were rendered stone, rendering Tyrion's other arm useless, slumped helplessly at this side. Summer knew what was coming next, but she couldn't look away. Naruto lashed out, shattering Tyrion's arms, one at the elbow, the other at the shoulder. Tyrion howled furiously and tried to kick him with his left leg. For all the good it did. Dad caught his heel and repeated the feat a fourth time, shattering the man's knee literally, into a dozen pieces. Tyrion limped forward. With a wordless snarl and tried to bite Dad's face off, snapping at his nose with the few broken teeth he had left. Summer almost felt sorry for him, the poor Faunus, in that moment. Almost. Kinda hard. To feel bad for someone who wanted to pluck your eyes. Dad could have killed him then, but he didn't. Instead, Naruto slapped an open palm against Tyrion's chest and kicked his remaining limb out from under him, unbalancing him once and for all. Bereft of any such leverage or his stinger by which to steady himself, Tyrion faltered. His leg buckled with a harsh crack, bending horribly beneath the weight of his own body. Driven down to his last knee, he slumped in the snow, wasted and gasping for air. No, she realized, not just gasping, sobbing. There's the fear. Naruto crouched down before him, hands on his knees. Silver eyes colder than Arctic steel. I was wondering which would break first. Your spirit, or your body? Looks like we have the answer. You. Tyrion rasped up at him. Tears of maddened despair shining in his bloodshot eyes. What in Salem's name are you? No one should have that kind of power. No one. What the hell are you? Naruto struck like a king taijutsu, knocking the Faunus flat onto his back. Tyrion toppled, and as he fell, Dad seized him by the face and slammed him into the ground, scattering snow in every direction. Cracks spider webbed outward from the impact as he dug his fingers in, holding his captive in place. You wanna know what I am? Tyrion hissed out a fearful breath. Whiskered cheeks dimpled in a grim smile. Sad to say, but I'm your bad luck charm. Have you ever seen a human turn to stone? Summer had once before, when some particularly plucky bandits happened upon their cabin. Naruto did to Tyrion what he had to them, but unlike then, he wasn't quick about it. It wasn't a quick process by any means. As she looked on, the Faunus' frightened face gradually began to harden into solid stone from his scalp down, dark granite overtaking flesh. Tyrion realized what was happening too late. His cries were soon muffled as Naruto brought down another palm to hold him in place. His prey panicked. Golden eyes swiveled this way and that as he thrashed about to no avail. His cries gradually grew more and more muffled as the petrification continued. As he was now, he lacked the limbs to pry Naruto's hands away, leaving his good leg flailing fitfully in the snow. All to no avail. Eventually, he stopped screaming, and all that remained was a stone statue. Naruto let him go and stood up. "Sweetie." Summer perked up. "Yeah, Dad. Cover your eyes." He reared back. "Raised a boot, now." Summer squeaked and averted her gaze. Crunch. She didn't see the stomp, but she certainly heard it and the successive blows that followed. When she looked back, all she saw was shattered stone. There was no trace of Tyrion, only broken bits of masonry, nothing at all to suggest there had once been a person there. In a way that was better. She did. In tea like blood and bone and all the icky bits. Shattering a statue seemed more impersonal somehow. Not that she felt bad about his death, mind you, because she didn't. Besides, he'd wanted to pluck out her eyes. Jerk. More importantly, you won. She all but tackled her father, practically burying her face in his knee as she bounced up and down with glee. You won, you won, you won. I knew you would. Naruto patted her head, rough fingers idly tousling her dark hair, but he didn't answer. He was still tense against her, eyes sharp, back rigid as he gazed into the unmoving forest. Daddy. She looked up at him and looked up through his fingers, alarmed by his silence. What's wrong? She was still speaking when he bridled. A kunai slid out his sleeve, landed in his palm and was summarily flung into the treeline. Something shifted in the dense branches, and for once, it wasn't a grim. Naruto pivoted and another knife flashed forth. This time, the faint flash of a camera lens caught her eye. On the third throw he struck true. A harsh clang reached her ears as a strange metal contraption tumbled to the ground, sparking fitfully. What was that? A drone of some sort. She enjoyed tinkering with machines. But she'd never seen anything like that. Whatever it was, it didn't last long. Papa stalked over to it and stomped down, rendering the poor thing a broken mass of sizzled circuits and pummeled propellers. Naruto struck it once, twice, thrice. Then snatched up the ruined remnants and hurled them deeper into the forest for good measure. Dusting off his hands, he shook his head. Damned drone. Pivoting, he looked at her and jerked his chin toward their cabin. Pack your things. We're leaving. Summer went still. Leaving. Yes, leaving. Papa placed both hands against her back and shooed her forward, ushering her back inside. If they found us once, they'll find us again. We need to go. Summer staggered up the steps two at a time, nearly tripping over herself in her haste to clear them. Go where? He snatched up his jacket and stomped into his room to pack his own things. I don't know. Summer stumbled. It was the first time she'd ever heard him say those words. The uncertainty in his voice lent her legs speed. She dashed into her room, snatched up her backpack, and took stock of her things. There wasn't much to take: her pillow, her practice axe, her books and tools. She stuffed them into her pack one after the other, until she couldn't fit anymore. So why did it feel like she was forgetting something? Wait, her cloak. Couldn't leave that behind. She lucked it from the wooden chest at the foot of her bed and withdrew the fabric almost reverently, careful not to crease the material. It was a beautiful white on the outside and an insulated red within. Replete with a snug hood to keep her face warm, perfect for long journeys. The mere act of wrapping herself up in it made her feel safe and warm. It smelled like cloves and parsnips mixed with mint, just like Mom. Summer didn't really remember Mom. She only had a name, Autumn, her scent, and the faint impression of a voice. She couldn't even remember what she looked like. It had been her dad too for as long as she could recall. He didn't talk about Mom these days. Not anymore. Naruto thumped the wall with a fist as he poked his head into her room, face stern. Ready. Summer donned her hood, hefted her pack, and nodded. Ready. His expression softened. Good. Idly she noticed his own backpack, much larger than hers, heavy and laden with all sorts of things. Food, probably. Hopefully he'd packed a lot. Papa patted her head, distracting her. Where to? He paused, considering their next move. We'll head into town first. Then move on to Mistral. If it's safe, we might stay there for a bit. If not, we'll go further south. Maybe menagerie if Mistral isn't safe. Or vacuo, he said, casually tossing out names and places as he made plans. No one would think to look for us there. Wait, Summer's brow furrowed. When you say Mistral, do you mean city or the kingdom? His whiskered cheeks dimpled. Yes, right. Because she'd lived in Mistral all her young life, but the main kingdom shared the same name. Kinda confusing, really. She'd never understand that. The continent was called Anima, but why name the kingdom and its main city the same? Wasn't that just a recipe for disaster? Of confusion at the very least. A thought occurred to her just then, and she perked up. If we're headed to the city, can we see Haven Academy? No. Summer pouted. Naruto stood his ground. I said no. Summer clasped her hands with a whimper. Please. Naruto wavered as a bead of sweat ran down his scarred brow. No means no. Summer sniffled, tears shining in her silver eyes. Pretty please with a cherry on top. Naruto folded like a house of cards and averted his eyes, unable to stand the sight of her sorrow. I'll think about it. Summer made happy summer noises and mped triumphant fists toward the heavens. Victory. Celebrate later. Her father pivoted and started walking. Move now. She thought he would lead her out of the house, but he stopped just before the crackling hearth and knelt inexplicably. As she looked on, he reached down and pried a floorboard loose, revealing a small space within. From there, he reached in and withdrew a small parcel wrap. Ed in dark blue cloth beneath the floorboards. What was that? Despite her own confusion, Summer found herself scrambling over to take a peek over Papa's shoulder and peer at his prize. She expected a fancy weapon, armor, perhaps maybe a necklace or even a ring. Something very valuable, downright precious. It was none of those. Rather than any awesome weapons, gold, jewels, or riches, she found herself peering at a simple headband. The black cloth worn with time. A metal plate stood stitched into the fabric, its silvery surface engraved with the swirling likeness of a leaf. As she looked on, Naruto patted it down, dusted it off, and summarily tied it around his head. Only then did he rise. He almost seemed to stand taller with it on, look younger somehow, and for a moment, it was as if all the years had fallen away. Curiosity got the better of her and she couldn't help but give voice to the nagging question on her mind. What's that? A memory. He cinched the cloth tight, let his long blonde bangs fall over at the cloth. And a promise. That sounded cool. It's pretty. Can I have one? Naruto blinked. Have one? Her question seemed to startle him for a moment. Sure. He recovered quickly and coughed into a fist. But there could be no denying the pleased flush in his face. Someday, he promised her. When you're older and you've begun the next phase of your training. Can mine be blue? His eyes widened just so. The reaction quickly masked. It can be whatever you like. Satisfied, Summer let him take her by the hand and led her out the house into the snow. The cold made her shiver, causing her to idly clutch her cloak close to herself. Will we ever come back? Maybe someday. It was a promise, then. She believed him wholeheartedly. Everything would be alright. And why wouldn't it be? After all, Daddy was God. Not just a god, but the god, one of the two she read about in her storybooks. She knew the signs, had seen him glow gold when he got serious. His eyes turning white when he hyper-focused. The who or where and why or what didn't matter to her. Summer didn't need to understand to believe, she just did. She was his daughter just as he was her daddy. He would never, ever lose. So she decided to look on the bright side. After all, she'd always wanted to go on a journey. Adventure tilde. This was the best day ever. Absolutely nothing could go wrong. Tyrion has perished. Everything had gone terribly, horribly wrong. Salem looked up from her seer, red eyes narrowing as the weight of those words struck her like a slap across the face. I beg your pardon. Arthur Watts knelt before her throne, one fist planted into the floor. He kept his head bowed, careful not to make eye contact lest he anger her further. Wise of him. He was new to her service. But he'd already learned the perils of angering her. He wouldn't dare defy her. After all, he had nowhere else to go. And his wisdom was useful. Not so wise as to avoid the lash of said seer, however. With a flick of her finger, one of its many whips cracked out, slashing into the man's back in recompense for his temerity. Explain. Ma'am. Despite the pain, he knew his place and kept his gaze fixed upon the floor. As you requested, I had one of my drones follow Kalos into the mountains of Mistral to monitor his progress. What of it? She scowled. Watts waited patiently for her to wave him on. As we suspected, he encountered a silver-eyed warrior there. Salem inhaled reflexively, but her minion wasn't yet finished, and the rest of his words twisted the knife further still. A man. He had a daughter. Lovely. The silver-eyed vermin were procreating again. Would she never be rid of these infernal godkin? Salem willed the seer to settle in her lap and idly ran her fingers across its slick surface. Did he at least manage to kill the girl? He did not, my queen. All around them, the windows cracked. Watts flinched, but resolved himself to finish his report or die trying. As I said, Kalos was killed. My drone recorded his death but was discovered and destroyed soon thereafter. Salem sighed. Did he at least die well? He died screaming. Salem slumped in her throne with a petulant sigh. Kalos had been mad, yes, but he was useful. There had been no need to train him up like some of the others, in part because he was so thoroughly skilled already. His faith was strong, his loyalty absolute. He thought her a goddess nothing further from the truth, but his belief served her cause well. She had but to make a demand and the deed would be done. He disposed of so many threats for her. All without want of reward. Better yet, there were no ties linking him to her whatsoever, no means by which Ozma might discover him. Now he'd gone and gotten himself killed by a superior opponent. Just like that other one a decade or so back. What was her name? Tick. No, Talk. That was the one. The crocodile faunus with the rare semblance. Fat load of good it did her. Calavera carved her up and left her for the crows. Such a waste. Disposable assets were so hard to find these days. Perhaps it was time to learn more of their enemy. Show me the footage. Watts winced. My queen. It is not so simple. The drone was destroyed. Salem clicked her tongue. But surely it recorded something. Her minion's shoulders slumped. It did. Show me. Watts withdrew his scroll from the folds of his coat and reluctantly presented it to her, forcing her to squint at the grainy scene upon the screen. The footage that followed left her jaw clenched and eyes wide. At first it seemed normal. But what followed, the fate that befell Tyrion, that golden glow and blazing white eyes, the ability to render his very flesh stone, just as he had with her Grim. You cannot die. The image of a golden dragon flashed through her mind and she flinched. The scroll fell from her fingers, struck the stone floor, and skidded back to Watts. Her capable servant retrieved it with a murmured word of thanks. Not that she heard him, he could have been shouting for all it mattered and she still wouldn't have heard her. No, it couldn't be. Not after all these years. The gods were gone, never to return. And yet she was undoubtedly looking at one of them, and if not him, an avatar of his power at the very least. A swell of shadow swept across her shoulders as her magic began to flare in response to her rising emotions. No, no, no. He would ruin everything. All her schemes, all her plots, all that she had in play, everything she had done and had yet to do. Salem grit her teeth against it and closed her eyes. To no avail. She tried to breathe, but she couldn't. Panic bloomed in her anger, her hate slipped its leash. She surged to her feet, seized the seer in her lap and flung it to the floor. Where it didn't shatter, but bounced once, tumbling away from her into the shadows. Its refusal to be destroyed irked her to no end. That was it, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. With a shriek of frustration, she lost control, threw her head back, opened her eyes and screamed. With a ponderous crunch the already cracked windows around her gave way and shattered from the seething shockwave of her shout. It didn't stop there. The floor fractured. Watts found himself flung across the room like a ragdoll, his back striking the doors of her chambers with a dull crackle of aura. And still Salem screamed, howling imprecations into the void. Her very tower trembled underfoot, threatening collapse if she didn't check her anger. In the grimlands below, her children screamed with her. Nevermore fled from her tower in droves. Beowulfs howled. Ursa roared at the sky as Beringles beat at their chests, and still it wasn't enough. Damn. Damn the gods. Damn them all to the pit. Why had the god of light returned? Why did he have a new champion? Why? The heavens had no answers for her. Only silence. Always silence. She wasn't sure how long she screamed for. Seconds. Minutes. It felt longer. As though she'd roared until she was hoarse. Finally, she was spent. Her shoulders slumped as she doubled, little gasps of hateful wrath fleeing from her lips as her lungs heaved for breath. Hands on her knees, shaking trembling, she grimaced against the black spots searing across her vision. She'd nearly passed out, such was her own anger. At her feet, Watts struggled to right himself and flee, a mistake on his part. It gave her something to focus on. A target. Arthur. Salem's gaze locked onto him like a heat-seeking missile, rooting him where he stood. Everward a vicious predatory purr. Contact Lionheart. Find this man. There is nothing of greater importance to secure our victory against Ozma. Whatever is needed to accomplish this goal, you will have it. Quote. He bowed hurriedly, muttered an affirmative and made to leave. Oh, and Watts, she called out after him, when you do find this man. Salem returned to her throne and sat down, steepling her fingers beneath her chin. Her dark eyes blazed with furious balefire. Bring him to me. Thanks for watching.